I still remember the way his voice echoed off the whiteboards. "Childish," he said, "try to think before you speak next time." The room went silent. It was a Wednesday afternoon, third week of the semester. I was sitting in the back corner of advanced theoretical physics at Jefferson State, notebook open, pen tapping nervously. The kind of class where everyone pretends to understand Schrödinger and spins while secretly panicking. Professor Warren Cross paced the front of the lecture hall like he owned the building, probably because he did. Tenure, awards, guest lectures at MIT. His voice was sharp, nasal, and constantly laced with sarcasm. If arrogance had a sound, it was him. There were 70 students in the room, and every single one of them looked up when he stopped mid-equation, turned to the front row, and said, "Mr. Reyes, did you really just say that?" Javier Reyes. Hispanic kid, quiet, sat front and center every class. I'd seen him once or twice in the tutoring center, always helping someone else. Skinny, thick accent, always polite. You could tell he'd grown up with people underestimating him. He'd raised his hand to question the assumption Cross had made about the photon path distribution. It wasn't disrespectful. If anything, he sounded hesitant, but Cross didn't care. "Childish logic," the professor repeated. "That kind of thinking might fly in a community college, but not here." The air got heavy. A few students laughed under their breath, the kind of laugh that stabs you in the ribs. Javier didn't flinch. He looked down, nodded once, and quietly said, "Then let me prove it." Now most kids would have backed off, taken the insult, waited for class to end, but not him. Javier stood up, not fast, not dramatic, just steady calm. He asked if he could use the board. Cross smirked, "Be my guest." I saw the tiniest flicker of something in the professor's eyes, maybe amusement, maybe irritation, but he stepped aside. Javier walked slowly to the board, took the marker in his hand, and for the next 8 minutes the room disappeared. No notes, no textbook, just numbers, clean, confident, deliberate. He rewrote the original assumption, adjusted the variables, and built the correction with a speed that made my jaw lock. Line after line, integrating real-world parameters Cross had skipped. No one breathed, even the students who'd been texting stopped. And when he boxed the final expression, a refined equation for photon interference with adjusted path variables, there was nothing left to say. Silence. Then Cross laughed, not out of joy, it was sharp, uncomfortable. He stared at the board, then back at Javier, and said, "You memorized this." "No," Javier replied, steady as stone. "I lived it. I spent the summer at Sandia National Labs. We worked on exactly this." The class gasped. One guy even whispered, "No way," out loud. Javier didn't blink, didn't gloat. He just put the marker down and walked back to his seat like nothing had happened. Professor Cross looked like he'd been slapped. For a moment I thought he might lash out again, but he didn't. He cleared his throat, adjusted his jacket, and said, "We'll revisit this tomorrow." That was it. The rest of class went by in a daze, no one really listening, everyone still replaying what we'd just seen. I sat there stunned, not because Javier had been right, but because of the way he'd stayed calm, proud, focused. I'd never seen someone put arrogance in its place so quietly. And it wouldn't be the last time. The next day, the buzz started before I even got to campus. I walked into the student union around 8:30 a.m., still half awake, and already heard 2 engineering majors whispering over coffee. "Did you hear about Ray's embarrassing Cross yesterday?" "No way, that guy's a fossil," finally. By mid-morning, the story had evolved. Some said Javier had dropped equations nobody had even seen before. Others claimed Cross had apologized, which wasn't true, but it showed how fast the story was traveling. I spotted Javier later that afternoon in the cafeteria. He was sitting alone by the window, hunched over a textbook with a half-eaten sandwich beside him. His backpack was open, papers spilling out like always. Same hoodie, same beat-up sneakers, same guy. But something had shifted. I could feel it. People were noticing him now, watching. A few students from another table walked past and gave him the kind of nod usually reserved for athletes or musicians, a mix of respect and curiosity. He looked up once, nodded back, then buried himself again in the page. I grabbed a tray and sat across from him. "Hey," I said. He looked up, surprised. "Hey, Mark, right?" "Yeah," I said, "that was insane yesterday. Like, I don't think I've seen Cross that quiet since orientation." He smiled just barely. He didn't like being wrong. No one does. I picked at my fries. You really worked at Sandia. He nodded. Internship, 3 months, mostly simulation modeling, but I got to work on light interference matrices. We used some of those equations yesterday. No wonder you schooled him. It wasn't about that, he said, his voice soft. I wasn't trying to win. I just didn't want him thinking I was stupid. That hit me harder than I expected. I looked at him, really looked, and realized how many times he'd probably been talked over, dismissed, overlooked because of his name, his accent, his quietness. I'd done it too without meaning to, just assumed he was some quiet math guy from nowhere. You're not, I said, stupid. He gave a small shrug, thanks. Then he asked something that caught me off guard. Why do you think he called it childish? I frowned. I don't know. Maybe he thought your approach was too simple. Javier nodded slowly, tapping his pen on the edge of his notebook. Funny thing is, the simplest answer is often the right one. Physics isn't about making things complicated. It's about making the complicated understandable. I sat back, chewing that over. He wasn't just smart, he understood why things worked. That was rarer than any formula. From that day on, people started paying attention. Javier didn't change. He still sat in the front, still kept his head down, still helped anyone who asked. But the dynamic had shifted. Even Cross started calling on him more. Not nicely, but with a new edge, like he was testing him, trying to find the boundary. Javier never broke, never raised his voice, just answered patiently, always with something no one expected. It made me wonder what else we'd all missed. How many quiet geniuses sit in front rows, never speaking up, because they know they'll be mocked if they do. Javier proved something that day, not just to Cross. To all of us. I don't usually go to office hours. Most of the time, they're a waste. You wait in line for 20 minutes just to ask a question the professor shrugs off like it's beneath him. But that Friday, something told me to stop by. Not for me. When I walked past Professor Cross's office, the door was half open. I heard voices, muffled at first, then clearer as I stepped closer. You weren't entirely wrong, Cross was saying. Javier's voice followed, calm as ever. I didn't come for an apology. Good, Cross snapped, because I don't give them easily. I leaned just outside the frame, not wanting to interrupt. The air in the hallway was stale, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're somewhere you're not supposed to be. Look, Cross said, clearing his throat, your derivation was correct. I double-checked it. I know, Javier replied. That pause that followed, I could feel the tension humming through the walls. You're not like the others, Cross continued. You don't just memorize, you think. That's how I was taught. Back home in New Mexico, my abuelo, he always said, you don't need to sound smart, you just need to be right. Cross gave a soft snort, almost a laugh. Well, he was right. Then came something I didn't expect. There's a symposium in D.C. next month, Cross said. I was going to submit alone, but your work on the interference pattern, I think it could anchor a joint paper. Javier didn't answer immediately. I imagined his face, that serious expression, always measured, always cautious. I'll think about it, he finally said. I stepped away before they could see me, heart beating fast, not because Cross had offered him a paper, but because I realized something bigger. Javier had just cracked through the shell of the most closed-off professor on campus. And he'd done it not by shouting, not by showing off, but by simply being right and refusing to back down. That weekend, people couldn't stop talking. Someone must have heard about the paper because by Monday, the rumors were everywhere. He's co-authoring with Cross. He turned down MIT last year, did you know that? Someone said NASA already called him. None of it was confirmed, of course, but none of it felt impossible either. Javier Reyes had become a name. I met up with him again in the library Sunday night. He was at his usual corner table, headphones in, hoodie up, pencil scribbling something into a legal pad like he was decoding the universe. Hey, I said, sliding into the chair across from him. He looked up, pulled his headphones off. Hey. DC, huh? He gave a small smile, might go, still thinking about it. What's there to think about? He looked down at his notebook, then back at me. I want to make sure it's for the right reason. I don't want to be someone's trophy. I want to be a voice. That hit me hard. Because that's what he was, not just a symbol of defiance, not just the kid who embarrassed a professor, but a voice for everyone who sat quietly in classrooms, second-guessed themselves, and wondered if they were good enough. He didn't need cross, he didn't need applause. He just needed space to be heard. And now that he had it, we were all starting to listen. By the second week of October, the entire department knew Javier was presenting in D.C. The flyer went up on the physics building bulletin board. Emerging voices in quantum mechanics. And there it was, printed in clean serif font. J. Rays and W. Cross, probabilistic refinement of light path distribution models. It didn't seem real. The guy we barely noticed 3 weeks ago, the one who always sat alone, head buried in graphs, was now listed alongside the most intimidating professor on campus, scheduled to speak at a national symposium. Cross tried to play it off like it wasn't a big deal, but you could tell. He started dressing sharper, throwing Javier's name around during lectures, referencing our research like they'd been colleagues for years. It was weird, but Javier didn't change. Still walked in 5 minutes early, still took notes during lectures he could have taught himself, still helped classmates struggling with vector equations without acting like he was doing them a favor. The day before the trip, I saw him in the quad, sitting under a sycamore tree. His laptop was open on one knee, and he was staring at the screen like it had personally offended him. "You ready?" I asked, tossing a bag of chips his way. He caught it, smiled faintly, almost. "Nervous." He paused, not about the science. "What then?" He looked at me and his voice dropped a little. Being in that room, all those people, the assumptions. I didn't have to ask what he meant. He was going to stand in front of an auditorium full of academics, most older, most white, most trained to doubt someone like him. Someone young, someone with an accent, someone who didn't fit their image of a physicist. But I'd seen what he could do, we all had. "You'll crush it," I said. He gave me a grateful look and nodded, "Thanks." The next day, he left for D.C. with Professor Cross, and a laptop bag slung over his shoulder like it weighed more than it should. We didn't hear much for a couple of days, just a text here or there. Arrived, conference packed, going over notes. No details, typical Rays. But on Sunday night, my phone buzzed with a picture from Jenna, a junior who'd been there volunteering. It was blurry, taken from the back of the room, but there he was, Javier, standing behind a podium, slide lit up behind him, sleeves rolled up, calm, clear, no paper in front of him, just talking. Her caption read, "He owned the rooms." Later, I found out what he'd said. He opened with the same line Cross had used in class. "Childish logic," he said into the mic. The crowd shifted, some chuckled, most were confused. Then he paused and said, "That's what I was told when I challenged a model we've been using for decades. Today, I'll show you why I didn't let that word stop me." And then he proved it. Line by line, slide by slide. He broke it down in a way even non-physicists could follow. No ego, no showmanship, just pure, relentless clarity. The applause lasted almost 2 minutes. Cross apparently didn't even clap at first. He just sat there watching, processing. Javier flew back the next day, quiet as usual. No parade, no announcement, just another Monday on campus. But everything had changed. People didn't just see him as smart now. They saw him as someone who'd earned it, who stood up, stayed steady, and didn't fold under pressure. And whether Cross liked it or not, his name now followed Javier's. A week after the symposium, a surprising email hit everyone's inbox. To all physics department undergrads, you're invited to an informal Q&A with Javier Rays to discuss his experience presenting at the Emerging Voices in Quantum Mechanics Symposium. Friday, 4 p.m., room 203. No mention of Professor Cross, no faculty signatures, just Javier's name. I got there 10 minutes early and still had to stand in the back. Word had spread fast. Engineering majors, freshmen, even a couple of grad students showed up. When Javier walked in, the room quieted on instinct. He wasn't dressed up, same hoodie, same scuffed backpack, but something about the way he carried himself was different, taller, still soft-spoken, but not hesitant anymore. He started the Q&A casually, thanking everyone for coming, cracking a joke about airport security confiscating his laser pointer. That got a few laughs. Then someone in the front asked, "Was it intimidating presenting next to Professor Cross?" Javier smiled. I wasn't standing next to him. I was standing beside the work. That's what mattered. That answer hung in the air like it was still echoing. For the next hour, people asked everything: how he built the model, what the rejection letters taught him, why he didn't just transfer to a more prestigious school. Because, he said, learning happens wherever someone's willing to listen. I don't need a famous zip code for that. At one point, someone asked, "How did you deal with being underestimated?" He paused. "My mom used to say, if they're not listening to you, make them listen to the truth." Then he added, "I don't speak louder, I just speak clearer." I looked around the room. You could see it in people's faces, the way they leaned forward, the notebooks being filled with more than just physics notes. It wasn't about equations anymore. It was about presence, grit. Javier wasn't just a good student. He was something bigger, a shift, a reminder. After it ended, people lingered. No one rushed out. A few came up to shake his hand. One girl asked if he'd mentor her on her senior project. A guy in the back told him he'd dropped physics sophomore year, but was thinking of coming back. Javier didn't act like any of this surprised him. He didn't act like he was owed it either. He just listened, answered, nodded. Later, I walked with him out to the quad. The sun was low, slicing through the trees, casting long shadows over the sidewalk. "Bet Cross wasn't thrilled about the solo Q&A, I said. He chuckled. He told me not to let it go to my head. "And did you?" "No," he looked up at the sky, "but I'll let it stay in my heart." That line stuck with me. Because that's what made him different. He didn't carry himself like someone trying to prove anything anymore. He'd already done that. Now he was just becoming. By November, the air had changed, colder, sharper, application season. Grad schools, research labs, scholarships, everyone was scrambling. Professors were flooded with recommendation requests, and most gave the same generic responses. "Send me your resume. Keep it to 1 page. Don't expect miracles." I wasn't planning to apply anywhere out of state. My grades were fine, not stellar, but one afternoon in the library, I mentioned it to Javier, just offhand, really more like venting. "I don't even know if I'll get in," I said. "I've got the GPA, but I'm not that guy. I've never presented anything, never been published." He looked up from his laptop. "What do you want to do?" "Teach, maybe, high school, help kids figure out the stuff that confused me." He nodded, thoughtful. "That's important." Then he said something that stunned me. "Use me as a reference." I blinked. "What?" "Put my name down. You've got the heart for this. I've seen how you help in study group. That matters more than memorizing the Planck constant." I tried to laugh it off. "You're the campus legend now. I can't ask you for that." He leaned forward. "It's not about legend. It's about lifting others when you've been lifted." There was no ego in his voice, no pity, just truth. I nodded, still a little in disbelief. 2 days later, I heard he wrote a recommendation letter for someone else too, a freshman girl from Honduras, brilliant in math but struggling with English. He'd been tutoring her quietly for months. No one knew. That's the thing about Javier. He didn't make noise, he made impact. And while Cross still taught the same way, the dynamic had shifted. Now, when students pushed back with ideas, he paused. Sometimes he even said, "Let's test that." It wasn't much, but it was a crack in the wall, and Javier made that crack. Rumors started circling that he'd been offered a spot in a NASA-affiliated research group. He never confirmed it, just smiled when asked, and kept showing up to class like normal. But one moment stood out. We were leaving campus late one evening, just the two of us. The halls were empty, lights buzzing overhead. I asked him, "If you do get into NASA, if you leave, will you ever come back?" He looked at me like I'd asked something deeper than I meant. "Yes," he said, "but not to prove anything, to teach, to build something that lasts." And then he said quietly, more to himself than to me, "They only call it childish when they don't understand it yet." I didn't respond, I couldn't. I just walked beside him in silence, knowing I'd remember that night for the rest of my life. Because for all his equations and perfect logic, the most powerful thing Javier ever proved was himself. Something strange happened the week before finals. I walked into our usual 10 a.m. lecture, expecting the same dry tone, the same maze of equations on the board. But that morning, Professor Warren Cross didn't start with numbers. He didn't even open the textbook. He just stood there for a moment, hands behind his back, eyes scanning the room, then said, "Before we begin today, I want to talk about mistakes." That got everyone's attention. Cross didn't do feelings. He did precision, formulas, citations, not reflection. He continued. "There's a danger in being right for too long," he said. "You start thinking you're untouchable, that your title, your reputation, your years in the field make you immune to being challenged." The room was dead silent. Then he added, "And sometimes, someone comes along who reminds you what the truth actually looks like." He didn't say Javier's name. He didn't have to. There was a long pause, then he turned to the board and finally began the day's topic, photon entanglement, but the mood had shifted. It wasn't about the science anymore. It was about respect. After class, a few of us lingered in the hallway, buzzing about what just happened. "He basically admitted it," one girl said. "Never thought I'd hear Cross say he was wrong," another added. Javier wasn't there that day. He'd flown out that morning for a weekend conference at Caltech, but by the time he returned, the story had made its rounds. I told him what Cross said, word for word. He didn't react much, just listened, nodded once. "That's good," he said, "not for me, for him." "You think it'll change him?" Javier looked off for a second, as if measuring the question. "I think it already did." "And it had." Cross began engaging more openly in class, asking students what they thought, not just what they knew. He started correcting with curiosity instead of condescension, still sharp, still tough, but fair. A shift that could only happen when a wall finally recognized the crack wasn't weakness, it was a door. The rest of the semester flew by, exams, deadlines, stress, but everywhere I looked, I saw the ripple of Javier's presence. A new tutoring group formed, bilingual, diverse, peer-led. Guess who started it? A few seniors submitted independent projects, using approaches similar to Javier's model, approaches Cross now approved without hesitation. And then one morning in the Commons, I saw something small, almost unnoticeable. A freshman, nervous, hands shaking, walked up to Professor Cross with a question, something basic, something that would have gotten him dismissed a month ago. Cross paused, listened, then leaned over and said, "That's not childish, it's the beginning of something, let's walk through it." I watched the kid's shoulders relax, I watched him smile. And in that quiet moment, I realized, Javier Reyes hadn't just changed one professor. He'd changed the tone of the entire department. Without shouting, without breaking, without trying to win, just by refusing to stay silent when truth was on his side. The last day of the semester arrived in a blur of caffeine and sleepless nights. Grades were due, everyone looked half alive, dragging laptops into the Commons, checking portals every 5 minutes like they were waiting for lottery numbers. I wasn't too nervous, I'd worked harder this semester than any before, but I was curious. Curious about how his name would show up. I remember refreshing the portal around noon, Physics 412, Advanced Theoretical Models, a class average of 78%, then the line that caught my eye. Top paper J. Reyes, 100%. Not best improvement, not strongest effort. Perfect. Even Cross hadn't gotten a perfect score in his own class, if the rumors were true. Word got out fast. People congratulated Javier like he'd won a trophy, but he didn't seem impressed by numbers. I caught him later in the study hall, sketching some diagram on graph paper, chewing the inside of his cheek like he was solving a private riddle. "You did it," I said. He looked up, we all did. I smiled, "Nah, you did it, top paper." Cross even posted it as a sample on the department website. He nodded slowly, I heard. "Does it feel good?" He shrugged, then after a moment. "It feels finished." That word lingered. Finished. Javier had never talked like that before, not finality, not closure. I asked cautiously, "Are you transferring?" "No," he said quickly, "just moving on." He pulled out a folded letter from his bag, an offer from the Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory, full research fellowship, starts in the spring. I held the paper like it was radioactive. This is huge. He gave a soft smile. Yeah, it is. We didn't say much after that, didn't need to, but as we walked out together, I noticed how familiar everything had become: the uneven tile outside the lecture hall, the smell of burnt coffee from the vending machine, the way people nodded when Javier passed by now, with respect. Before we split, I turned to him. You know you changed things. He tilted his head. How do you mean? This place cross, the way people think, the way I think. He looked down at his shoes, then up at me with something deeper than pride, something closer to peace. I didn't want to change them, he said. I just didn't want them to change me. And with that, he walked off down the hall, backpack bouncing against his shoulder, disappearing into the winter light pouring through the exit door. I stood there a little longer, letting it settle. Because that's the thing about people like Javier Reyes. They don't knight a stage. They don't chase attention. They don't fight to be loud. They just tell the truth. And if you're lucky enough to be nearby, you walk away better. A month after the semester ended, I came back to campus, just for the day. My sister had a tour scheduled at Jefferson State. She was a high school senior, still undecided but curious. I offered to show her around, partly because I knew the shortcuts and vending machines, but mostly because I hadn't let go yet. The campus was quieter in January, wind cutting through empty benches, the library windows fogged with heat, students trickled in wearing heavy coats and earbuds, heads down. I walked her through the physics wing, showed her the lab rooms, the study lounge, even the exact lecture hall where the now legendary Cross versus Reyes moment had happened. It was right there, I said, pointing at the first row. He stood up without raising his voice, changed everything. She smiled. You still talk about him like he's famous. He kind of is, I said. We stopped by the East Corridor, a stretch of wall where faculty posted current research and student recognition. Back when I was a freshman, I used to walk past it without looking. Now I looked. And there it was. A freshly mounted black and gold plaque. Simple, clean, no spotlight, just presence. Javier Reyes, class of 2024. In recognition of academic excellence, leadership through integrity, and for reminding us all what it means to think independently. I didn't speak for a minute, neither did my sister. Below the plaque was a frame holding a printout of his paper, the same one that earned him the top mark, the one Cross had once dismissed before finally endorsing. There was a short note from Cross at the bottom. Mr. Reyes reminded this department that clarity, not volume, wins arguments, that intellect can arrive with humility, and that sometimes the best thing a teacher can do is listen. I took a step back, let it soak in. Did you ever tell him what he meant to you? My sister asked. Not directly, I said, but I think he knew. She nodded. He sounds like someone who left more than just answers behind. He did, I said. He left space for others. And that was true. The department had changed. I'd heard through friends that 2 new teaching assistants were bilingual now. Office hours were fuller than ever and more patient. Even Cross had started opening his lectures with questions instead of monologues. Not because of a policy, because of a person. Javier didn't tear the system down. He just walked through it differently and left the door open behind him. As we turned to leave, I reached out and touched the edge of the plaque. Cool metal, sharp corners, solid. Just like him. 2 months later, in March, I got a letter. Not an email, a real physical envelope, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Javier's handwriting neat, almost architectural. Mark, I've been meaning to write since I left. Time just got away from me. Caltech, then Fermi. Then here, the lab where days blend into equations and nights stretch longer than they should, but I wanted to say thank you. You didn't just sit beside me in class. You saw me. That matters more than you know. This year, I've been asked to speak at 3 different symposiums, not because I'm the loudest, but because someone once let me borrow their voice when I wasn't sure of mine. You were that person. Keep writing, keep teaching, keep noticing the quiet ones. You never know who's building the next bridge from the back row. Jay. I read it twice, then a third time. Then I sat down and cried, quietly, in my apartment, with the morning light bleeding through the curtains and the coffee gone cold. Not because I was sad, because I felt seen. That same week, Jefferson State's department newsletter went out. On page 2, there was a new section, the Raise Initiative. It was a scholarship fund, modest to start, donations from faculty, alumni, a matching grant from the university, but the mission was clear. To support underrepresented students in physics and engineering, and to encourage original thinking in environments where it's often discouraged. Javier's name wasn't mentioned beyond the title. That was how he'd wanted it, I was sure. He never needed credit, just progress. Over the next few weeks, more stories came in, whispers from students at Fermi. He was mentoring interns, even first years, volunteering for outreach in public high schools, designing materials that made complex topics understandable for kids who didn't have AP classes or fancy labs. He was building something bigger than a resume. I remember sitting in the student lounge one evening, watching a new crop of freshmen arrive for orientation, nervous, eager, some of them clearly lost. And I saw him in all of them, in the way one kid held his notebook too tight, or how another asked a question so softly the professor almost missed it. I leaned forward and answered, like I'd seen Javier do 100 times. Because that's how this works. One voice doesn't echo forever unless someone carries it forward. And we all would. Because once you've met someone like Javier Reyes, you stop waiting for the world to change you. You start changing the world, piece by piece. Quietly, persistently, clearly. The next time I saw him was in person. No texts, no headlines, no second-hand stories. Just Javier standing at the edge of a university stage, hair a little longer, sleeves rolled up like always, eyes scanning a packed lecture hall at Stanford. It was a national education conference. I'd come as part of a small delegation of aspiring teachers, expecting panels on curriculum reform and standardized testing. But when I saw his name on the Saturday afternoon agenda, Equity Through Clarity, Teaching Science Without Losing Students, my heart jumped. I hadn't told him I'd be there. When he took the stage, the room quieted immediately, not because he commanded it, but because his presence did, still calm, still centered, still exactly the same person who once asked to borrow a whiteboard marker in a cold lecture hall back home. He began with a story, not about research, not about awards, but about a kid. He sat in the back, never raised his hand. I saw myself in him, not because he looked like me, but because he stayed quiet the way I used to. I asked him after class, "What did you think of today's topic?" He said, "I don't think my version of thinking is welcome here." That's when I realized, it's not enough to teach science. We have to teach people that their thinking belongs in science. You could feel it ripple through the room. He spoke for 15 minutes, maybe 20. No slides, no flashy visuals, just him, talking like he was building something right there in the space between his voice and our ears. Then came the Q&A. A woman stood up, older, gray sweater, reading glasses. Her voice trembled as she spoke. How do you keep your humility when everyone keeps telling you you're exceptional? The room stilled. I watched Javier look down, then up again, measured, honest. Because I remember how it felt to be dismissed, he said. Because being right is never the goal. Being understood is. Applause rose around me. I didn't clap. I couldn't. My hands were still, my throat tight. He had just said everything I had tried to explain for years about why I wanted to teach. After the panel ended, I waited in the hallway outside the auditorium. People passed by, chatting, trading business cards. He walked out alone, no entourage, just a notebook tucked under his arm and his head tilted slightly to one side, listening, always listening. When he saw me, he stopped. His eyes widened, then softened into something familiar. "Mark." "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. I failed. He smiled, walked over, and pulled me into a hug, the kind of hug that says I remember, the kind that says thank you without needing to say it. "You came all this way." "I was already here," I said, "but yeah, I came for this." We sat down on a bench outside, the noise of the conference fading behind us. "You were brilliant in there," I said. I wasn't trying to be. I know, I said, that's why it worked. He leaned back, staring up at the pale blue sky. I still don't know if I belong in rooms like that. You don't need to belong in the room, I said. You are the room now. Everyone else just doesn't know it yet. He chuckled. That sounds dangerously close to a compliment. Don't get used to it. We sat there for a long time, no rush, no plan. Just two people who once shared a classroom, now sharing a moment far from where it all started. And I realized I wasn't watching a student become a leader. I was watching a leader remain human. That was Javier's true legacy, not the letters after his name. Not the publications, the panels, the applause. It was his refusal to forget where he came from, and the quiet promise to never leave anyone else behind. A year later, I stood at the front of my own classroom. A real one, chalkboard, 30 desks, one too many broken ceiling tiles, a public high school just outside Albuquerque. It wasn't fancy. The projector flickered every time it rained. Half my students showed up hungry, some barely spoke, some didn't speak at all. But they showed up. And so did I every day. I'd written "Welcome to Physics" on the board in blue marker that morning, right above the formula for momentum. Below it, a quote, the same one I had taped inside my notebook the day Javier stood up to cross. You don't need to sound smart, you just need to be right. I never told my students who said it, but they'd ask eventually, and when they did, I'd tell them about a classmate I once had. The one who never raised his voice. The one who never chased applause. The one who reminded an entire institution that truth doesn't need permission, it only needs space. Every semester, I leave that quote on the board. In every semester, one student, sometimes quiet, sometimes overlooked, sometimes unsure of their place, stays behind after class and asks, "Is that really true?" I always smile, yes, it is. Because Javier Reyes taught me more than any textbook ever could. He taught me that every room has corners, and some people are pushed into them the second they walk in. But it only takes one voice, clear, honest, unwavering, to pull those corners outward. Until the classroom becomes a circle. Until everyone has room. And now, that's the kind of classroom I build. One desk, one voice, one student at a time. Just like he did.